Good afternoon and welcome to Workforce Wednesday webinars, a professional development series that helps diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers and influence their personal and professional lives. And now our host, James McFarland.
Oh, welcome. This is James McFarland. I'd like to welcome you to the April 5th edition of Workforce Wednesday. Workforce Wednesday is brought to you by our sponsors, Toyota Tushio and Truist Bank. Before we get to today's guest, I'd like to have you all visit some of the Urban League's social media pages to find out what we have going on here at the League. Today's guest is Sarah Sword. Sarah is the talent acquisition coordinator, consultant, with the Hannah Research Group. Hey, Sarah, how are you doing?
Hey, James, I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine. I would like for you to talk to the people about some of the things that you can help them with in mastering their interviews.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So today, what I want to talk to everybody about is kind of an interview boot camp, right? So you may be in that time of your life where you haven't interviewed in a while, or you may be in that time of your life where you keep interviewing and you're just not getting the results you want. So we're going to talk about how to go about getting that interview and then succeeding in that interview. So some of the things we'll talk about today is that pre-interview. So you got the call for the interview, what's next? And then being comfortable. Interviews can make extroverts extremely nervous. So we're going to talk about how to calm our nerves before going on, signing on, going in person, whatever way your interview is going to be. We're going to talk about some of those tough questions you may be asked at interviews. A lot of times we think those questions are asked to trick people. They're never asked to trick people, but they're asked to see how you respond to certain stressful situations. We're going to talk about the Sarah method, I like to call it. Most people may know it as the STAR method, but we're going to call it the Sarah method of how to answer those questions along with other questions. We're going to talk about a lot of times with COVID-19, we've been doing a lot of interviews online. And so obviously today we're having this presentation on Zoom. So we are going to talk about how to interview online to make sure that is successful as well. And then we'll just go over some tips on how to be successful so you can get that job that you want. And so before the interview, so you got the call you've been waiting for. It's the job you want. It's an organization you want to be a part of. So there's a lot of work we need to do to prepare before we even walk into that room or sign on virtually. Most of the effort actually happens before you actually talk to the hiring team. So let's talk about some ways that we can get prepared for that. First, and this is so crucial, everyone, research the company and industry that you have applied for. You would be surprised. I've probably been doing interviews now for over a decade. You would be surprised. That is always the first question someone will ask you. Tell us what you know about our organization. Tell me what you know about us. What do we do? You'd be surprised how many people apply for jobs and have no idea. They have no idea where they've applied, what they've applied for. So I think the number one tip I can give anybody is researching the company before your interview is crucial. What do they exactly do? What product do they produce? What service do they have? What is their history? What is their story? How many employees do they have? What types of departments do they have? What's their company culture? General knowledge of the organization is crucial. You don't have to know every detail, but you do need to know some key facts. You can research the company's website. You can look on their LinkedIn page, any of their social media pages, their Facebook, their Instagram. I even see organizations now having TikTok. A lot of people like TikTok. So, but know where you've applied. That's so, so important.
Hey, Sarah, let me ask you this question. Are you sharing your screen so we can see the presentation?
I am. I thought I was. Am I not?
Go ahead and see if you can hit shared screen and see if you can get that to come up.
Oh, geez. Sorry, everyone.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. You're doing fine.
Oh, man. Okay, let's try again. Well, in show. Okay, let's try. My goodness. Okay.
Under share screen.
Yes, I gotta get my PowerPoint going again.
No
Um,
problem.
I got a lot of different tabs apparently going
Hey,
on. I'm so sorry about
No
that.
problem. We're used to technical difficulties.
Okay, no, is this
There you
better?
go. Yeah, you're better. Let me get out of here now. You're on.
Apparently, everyone, my technology wasn't ready, as I told you all yours should be. So, so we talked about researching the company. The next thing we want to do after that is, I'm so glad that's working now. The next thing we want to do is learn everything about the position. I like to talk about this as transferable skills. So a lot of people after COVID, they were burnout and they were tired and they were looking for a new career path. And a lot of times they say, I can't do this. I don't have the skills for it. I don't have the knowledge. But transferable skills in a lot of industries are so crucial and so important. I know somebody, they went from being a middle school teacher and now they sell insurance. And so I asked him, I said, middle school and insurance are two different things. Tell me which of those skills transfer to the insurance industry. And he told me the ability to multitask, building relationships, organization, the ability to present ideas clearly and effectively, and the ability to be a team player. So a lot of times, if you're transferring between industries, if you're going, for instance, from education to insurance or banking to healthcare, really sit down and look at those transferable skills and see how you can transfer that to that new position you're wanting to be a part of. Knowledge is easy to learn. Systems, databases, all of that is easy to learn, but transferable skills, those are really going to take you to that next level in that interview if you don't have that experience that they may be looking for. Another thing I tell people is figure out what type of interview you are participating in. I actually, I like to tell stories, but one story I have is last week, I do phone screens before I send them to the hiring manager. And my candidate, I always say, I'm going to call you from this number. My candidate actually showed up on site because he thought it was an in-person interview. So knowing what type of interview it is crucial. So is it in person? Is it on the phone? Is it virtual? And that allows you to get prepared for that. So if you're going for an in-person interview, you may want to map out your route before you go. How long will it take me to get there? What kind of traffic is there during that time of the day? And I always tell people, arrive 5 to 10 minutes early because you're going to have those nerves. You don't want to be late. You want to be prompt. So that's for an in-person interview. If it's online, test your equipment. Apparently, I had not tested my equipment before sharing with you all. So test your equipment the day before to make sure that you have the right capabilities to access the platform that you'll be using with that organization for the day. I always think this one helps people too. So practice interview questions you may be asked beforehand so that you are comfortable. So during the COVID pandemic, I went on a huge career change. I used to manage people with a educational grant, and now I do talent acquisition consulting. So I've even jumped fields in what I do. And so to be prepared for interviews, and so I didn't get nervous or talk fast, I would research popular interview questions. And so I would write down those questions, write down those answers, and then learn to conversate, not reading from a script, but conversating with those questions. This can get you in the right mindset for how you want to answer them. You may have multiple answers for them. It helps to prepare those examples like I used to do. I used to have papers and papers of interview questions that I would just practice and read over, and just to get an idea in my head of what I wanted to say when I got that opportunity to interview. And it also helped me be a lot less anxious so that I could conversate with the phone screener, with the hiring manager, with whoever I was talking to, because I already had that idea in my head of what I was going to say. So that really helped me when I was on the job market.
Before you move on, Sarah, let me ask you a question. When you said practice interview questions, you may be asked before you, so that you'll feel comfortable.
Sure.
Are there any particular questions that most people ask all the time in all interviews?
Sure, absolutely. So I think questions people ask, and so further down we have tough questions people ask, but just general questions. Tell me about yourself. Why are you in the job marketplace? Tell me about your organization skills. Tell me a team project you did and how you worked with a team and what was your part. So just some general questions like that you'll see asked. You may have questions that are specifically asked to that job. So if it's a sales job, tell me how you would sell this item. How would you put this item on the shelf? How would you put this item in the consumer hand? So kind of looking at those questions that relate to that job of how you would be asked.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Sarah, I have a question. So you
Sure.
mentioned transferable skills.
Yes.
How do we let the employer know that, while we may not be particularly qualified for this position, we see these transferable skills, or I see these transferable skills as applicable to this position? Do I let them know that in the cover letter, or how?
So yeah, that's a great question. So I think you can let them know in the cover letter. I think you can let them know in a conversation too, right? So you've applied for a job, you've read a job description, and a lot of times it'll have skills or qualifications that we think a person may need to have to be successful in that position. And so you may want to, once again, like I talked about writing down interview answers, you may want to go through and what they say qualifications or skills that you may be writing down your transferable skills so you can throw in those keywords when you talk to the hiring manager or the recruiter.
Thank you.
Yes. So the night before the interview, I know that is the most stressful part. At least it was when I was out there in the battlefield. I like to call it the battlefield. So when I was out there. And so some things to remember the night before. So review your notes, go over your notes. Remember, we know about this company. We can go in there and spit off facts and information about this company because we've done the research. We also want to know about the position we've applied for and those transferable skills that we just talked about. And then reviewing those sample interview questions that we may have answered. Travel, time, location. Review the email about where your interview will take place. Map out the route before the night before so you can plan how you're going to get there. Think about the traffic at specific times of the day, construction you may encounter. And I've also done too, but this is because I'm very type A. If you're unfamiliar with the location, I might do a drive-by the night before if it's close enough, right? Because sometimes people are in suite buildings and office buildings that I'm not familiar with. So I've even done a drive-by the night before because I'm so anxious the next day. I want to know exactly where I'm going. And make sure you arrive early to that interview. I think interview attire is a big thing. People always say now, well, how should I dress? Pre-COVID, I think that people wore suits and they wore ties and women wore blazers. And I think all of that is still appropriate, but I think it also depends what kind of job you apply for, right? So I tell people, make sure you have your outfit selected the night before. You don't want to rush around the next morning trying to get ready. You're going to grab the shirt that has a spot on it. You just don't want that stress. But for instance, if you're applying for a warehouse position, a forklift position, something else, you may not wear a blazer to that interview, but you may wear a nice shirt and some khakis or some nice shirt and a jeans to that interview. So you really want to dress for the job that you're applying for. And this may sound, this is something we always talk about, but sleep. The best thing you can do for yourself the night before is to go to bed and to go to sleep. Relax before you go to bed. Do something you enjoy. So if it's watching that trash TV show, reading a book, whatever it is, you have done the prep for this, so you're ready. You've already prepped. You've already made your notes. You can always only read those notes so many times.
Hey, Sarah, I got a question from the audience. One of
Sure.
them asked, when the question arises, tell us a little bit about yourself. Should you talk about yourself personally or about the position and the jobs that you do?
That's an awesome question. So I always tell people, have an elevator speech about yourself. And so when I was applying for jobs, I had about a 30-second to a minute elevator speech about what I'd done, what I was doing, and how it related to where I was wanting to go. I would tell people not to talk about yourself personally. Personally. Personally, I think talking about yourself personally could create bias. So for instance, if you're a single mom and you have 2 kids and it's just you, that could create bias to the interviewer. They may think, well, she has kids. She might have to take off work all the time. Can she get to work? Who's going to help her with her kids? So I think leaving those personal details out, make sure that there isn't that bias going on in that interview process. There's bias already in interviews without a doubt. So if you can take out as much bias as you can, I would refrain from talking about anything personal.
Great, thanks.
So you've arrived for your interview. So now it's time to shine, right? We're ready, we're going, we're shining. And I always tell people, you made it. So they've looked at you, they already like what they see. They already like what you've written down, what your cover letter may be, what your resume may be. They like what they see, but our nerves can always get the best of us. So these are just some tips before you walk in to calm you and make you feel a little bit better. I always say go for a walk. So if you get there early enough, maybe you do a lap in the parking lot. Maybe you walk up and down, do something. Fresh air can help clear your mind. It can clear your lungs, clear your thoughts, and get you in the right mindset before you walk in that door. So fresh air is actually proven to make us feel better. I think that's why we all get excited about spring and summer, because it's finally fresh air and we can get outside. So I like to call this the STOP method. And the STOP method is another method you may want to try before you walk in. The importance of this technique is so you slow down and you're deliberate in what you're doing and what you're thinking. It reminds us that we have the power to banish our own fears, doubts, nerves, even in the most pressure cooking situations. And so the acronym stands for, the S is stop what you're doing and focus on your thoughts. The T is take a few deep breaths. The O is observe what's going on in our body, mind, and emotions and why we may feel that way. And P is to proceed with intentions to incorporate what we've observed during this time in our action. I think that that's a great way just to take a moment and place yourself where you're going, what you're doing, and put yourself in the best mindset possible before you speak to those hiring officials. And the last thing, it sounds crazy, but having a pep talk with yourself. So it's actually been scientifically proven that pep talks with yourself help to motivate yourself. Tell yourself all the things you need to hear before you go in there. I'm smart. I'm qualified for this role. I'm going to kill it. They're going to want me. Say it out loud, and that really makes it stick. And say it with confidence. Believe in yourself, because you've already made it this far. You've made half the battle. So be confident in who you are and just make sure that you say that to yourself right before you walk in that room. So we've made it now, right? We're in the interview. You're in the hot seat. It's time to shine and to show them what you're made of. So like I said, I've done a lot of interviews in person, phone screens, online, and these are some of the best things I can tell anybody who's in that interview situation. I think the number one thing I would tell anybody is listen. So many times we are already forming our own thoughts when someone is speaking and we're not really listening. And I'm sure that you all notice that throughout the day. If your friend is telling you a problem, you are already formulating the solution to her problem before she's even finished. You're not even listening to what they're saying. So truly take time and listen to the interview question 100%. When you respond, even reword the question in your answer to show you understood the question and that you are answering. I've sat through many interviews, you all, where people do not answer the question. And then you have to say, well, actually, the question was blah, 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 blah. And so you have to redo that. And so that shows that you're listening. You're able to maybe almost multitask, right? I'm listening, I'm giving an answer that relates to the situation. So the number one thing, listen to what the actual question is. And then actually answer that question, like I just said. So answering the question that you've been asked. There's no need to add additional stories or scenarios that do not relate to the question. Please don't do it. Don't do it. Just don't do it. I already told you all when answering a question, we're going to talk about how to use the Sarah method, right? So we're going to talk about that on our next slide. And that's going to help us answer those questions a little bit more concisely so that we aren't running around with our nerves and being anxious and answering whatever comes out of our mouth. The next thing too that I notice, and I know other people notice when people are interviews, is that positive body language. So we've already talked about interviewing is difficult enough, especially if I haven't interviewed in a long time, or if I'm trying to jump into a new career path. So it can be even more difficult with having to wear that mask. You feel like you're wearing a mask and you shouldn't. So even if you feel like you're wearing that mask, give that positive body language. Make sure to look at the interviewer in the eyes. Sit up straight. This portrays confidence and allows you to feel more comfortable. Keep your hands clasped. A lot of times I've sat in interviews and people will play with their hands. They'll bounce their leg, they'll fidget. And it's really distracting as an interviewer. And it's almost like you can't focus on what the interviewee is saying because that body language is so intense and they can't stop fidgeting. So I would tell anyone, make eye contact, smile, sit up straight, be clear and direct in what you're doing. Obviously, we always say, try not to say, and yeah, and those are filler words, and it's hard sometimes, but find other words to fill that with so you're not saying those words. And I notice I do that as well. We all do, but we want to portray that confidence once again in that positive body language. Keep it conversational. And I think this is so important. Some of the best phone screens I have are with people who can carry on a conversation. And being conversational and not being textbook about things. So just being able to talk like you're talking to a friend, like you're talking to a coworker or somebody in your family. So they already know you have the skills. They've went through your resume, like we talked about, your cover letter. They know you have the skills. But we're looking at too, will this person fit into our culture? Can they fit in on our team? And this can help you stay calm and allow for you to answer those questions more clearly. It may even help you be more enthusiastic. So keeping it as a conversation is really, I think, beneficial to everybody. And it helps to not have that harsh environment, that rigid environment. And it's just really going back and forth and having that dialogue with the interviewee.
Oh, let
And
me ask you a
also,
question before we go
yes.
to the next slide. When you say keep it conversational, let's say you have a phone interview.
Mhm.
What are they looking for on those phone interviews? Are they looking for the ability to have a conversation? Or are they looking for something else during that phone interview? Because when you don't see when you can't get a feel for how the interviewer is responding to the interviewee, when you're in a room or open setting, you can actually feel that or see that. But on the telephone, that's a little more difficult to do. So what are the interviewers looking for when they do phone interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do a lot of phone screens a day. That is what I do currently for a company in Lexington. And I think when it comes to, obviously, I think James brings up a good point. I can't see what that person looks like, but I can tell how they talk to me. I can tell, does their voice fluctuate? Do they get excited about things? One position I hire for is delivery drivers. And so if they're able to conversate with me, a stranger, just kind of laid back, able to answer the questions, not be uptight or rigid, I really notice that. And I even make note about it because then I feel like they're going to be able to talk to customers that they encounter. So it's about your tone. It's about how you say things. It's about just not being so strict and stringent in your voice, being able to laugh at things. Maybe sometimes I'll ask, tell me an example of good customer service. And I can kind of tell in their tone, the passion you use, different things like that. And then that kind of helps me know, hey, I think they're going to be able to talk to a customer, talk to a client. And even if it's difficult, I think they're going to be able to do that.
Great. Yeah, that answered that question. Thanks a lot.
No problem. So this is my favorite method because it's spelled like my name. It doesn't have an H. And I think it's really important when answering an interview question. So anytime when you're answering a question, to keep on track with your answer, use the SARA method. You may have heard of it as the STAR method, but we're renaming it today. So the SARA method stands for situation, action, result, and application. So let's talk about how we could apply that to a question. So our interview question is, can you tell us about a time when you provided great customer care? And so the interviewee is going to say, absolutely. One time while working with a client, they became upset because they felt like nobody was trying to get to the root of their issue, of their banking problem, and they felt that they weren't being heard. So right there, I've told you up front, this is the situation. The customer feels like they're not being heard. To make the situation better, I listen to the client and ask questions to figure out what could be done to help with their problem. So you've taken action now. You've done the second step. You've taken action to the situation. Next, with the help of them answering their question, I was able to see that we dropped the ball and was able to correct the action that had happened with their account. So now I've provided a result to that client. I feel that I did a great job listening to the customer and resolving the issue. The customer is happy and continued using our services. I feel that with my quick thinking and caring attitude that I was able to bring those skills, I would be able to bring those skills to your company, which are transferable skills, to improve interactions that are done with your customer. And that's the application I'm going to bring. So you should be able, with any type of interview question, to do the SARA method, to figure out what was the situation, what action did I take with the situation, what result happened, and then the application to see it all the way through. In answering questions like that, some people actually score people if they use the STAR method, and if they're actually answering the question to its fullest ability. That way, using this method is really going to help you answer that question without getting sidetracked, which we talked about previously. So earlier, James had asked, what are some common questions that we see in interviews? What are some common ones that you ask? And so I think common questions are good and tough questions are good, because when interviewing, you will always encounter questions that you don't know how to answer, or maybe they make you a little bit uncomfortable. And employers ask those questions to see how you problem solve, how you process information. And even going back to the slide we did previously with how you outline your answer, they're looking to see, do you have that train of thought in a situation like an interview to outline like that? But these may be some of the difficult questions that you may be asked, and we're going to talk about how we would answer those. A big one, I would say this is the number one question, and I ask candidates this when I interview them: why do you have gaps in your employment? So this is something we're seeing a lot more often now, especially with the pandemic, with been in a pandemic. If your gap is due to the pandemic, explain that to an employer. That's okay. You may say, I had to take that time off because I had to make sure that my kids were able to attend school online and I had to be their teacher. Maybe you had to be a caregiver during that time to a spouse, to a family member. It's okay. Tell the truth. It's okay. If you had to take a gap, it's okay. Let them know why you took that gap. And we are seeing gaps during the pandemic. Actually, a real life example, I interviewed a man today and he had a gap in his resume. And I said, hey, I see you got this gap between X year and this year. What was going on? And he just said to me, well, I've moved from point A to point B and it took me that long to find a job. There's nothing wrong with that answer. I said, okay, man, thanks. Thank you. And that just lets me know, hey, he moved from point A to point B and he was looking for a job. So I would really be honest about why you have those gaps in your resume. I would say also with that too, during that time, you may have had a gap because you decided to go back to school. You decided to do freelancing work. You decided to volunteer, whatever it may be. Those are also good answers and those are okay answers. It's okay to have that gap, but be ready to explain that gap and be comfortable with explaining that gap in your resume. Now, would I say that, I decided to take some time and go to the beach and never come back? I might not tell that story. I might not say that to somebody, but any of those other answers, volunteerism, taking classes, going back to school, freelancing, moving from point A to point B, the pandemic, just be confident in that answer and own your story. And I think the more you can own your story, the better. Today, once again, that man owned his story and I didn't really feel the need to question it. And I could see on his resume that he had moved from point A to point B. So another thing too with that gap, also, you can talk about what you learned during that time off and how it'll help you in this new position. So maybe you took some classes because you are doing that career change. Talk about that with the employer. I decided to make it a career change. I wanted to get a little bit more education. So I went back to school and I took classes X, Y, and Z. Talk about that with your hiring officials when you're with them. If you want, people say, what should I do with those gaps? If you want, you can put these gaps in your resume. If you're on medical leave, taking care of a family, etc. So I've seen where maybe there is a gap and someone said taking care of a family member, going back to school, different things like that. You can't put that, and explain it later. I think that is completely up to you. But employers, I would say, do notice those gaps in your employment history. So that's tough question number one. Own your answer though. Tough question number two. what would you change about your last job? If you're like me, you have 10,000 answers you would say. What would I change about it? Many times this can truly become a gripe session in an interview, and it's not meant to be a gripe session. And the one thing, if I tell you one thing, there's some pieces I want you to know from today. Do not ever badmouth your old employer. You never know who is connected in a room. You never know who knows one another. Do not badmouth your previous employer. What you can do, though, to switch the question is focus on yourself directly and the things you felt held you back. So if an interviewer said, what would you change about your last job? You may say, I felt that some of our technology was dated, and if I would have really liked to have seen more advanced technology that could have helped me create X, Y, and Z. You may say, felt like my last employer really lacked some career advancement opportunities with professional development or with advanced education. And so I would have really liked to have seen that changed at my last job. But whatever example you find, I would focus on how it relates back to you. And I would never, ever badmouth a previous employer, because people are connected and people talk. Even when people shouldn't talk, they talk. Another question, I think I've seen this in countless interviews: describe a disagreement you had with your boss or a team member. And as an employer, we realize you will not get along with everybody all the time. It's not possible, and it will never happen. Nobody expects you to get along with everybody. But what we do expect is, how did you handle this situation? So an employer wants to get insight onto how you handle problems. So it's best to share a story and one that actively had a solution at the end. Once again, using that Sarah method to say, hey, this was our disagreement. This was the situation, but this is what we did action-wise. This is the results from it and how we applied it. So really looking at how you solve that situation, Be sure to describe the situation in details and explain how you help to facilitate a cohesive result. I believe that really helps to show that you're a problem solver. So you may not get along with person A or your boss or whoever it is, and disagreements are going to happen, but how can we take that disagreement into a positive? I think that's really crucial. And once again, you never want to bad talk your previous boss or a previous team member. That's just something you really want to stay away from. And finally, a tough question we hear a lot of times is, what is your biggest weakness? And sometimes when I'm asked that question, I think, man, I could list like a whole slew of things. But employers ask this question to see if you have a sense of self-awareness and how you're working to improve it. So an example of that is, for me, I have a very type A personality. My husband would tell you I have control issues of how things should be done. So if someone said, Sarah, what's your biggest weakness? I'd say, I have a type A personality and some control issues, but I've learned along the way to let other people do things and let them help me out, so that maybe that stress can be relieved from me, and so that they're able to do things to feel involved. And so you're really looking at that self-awareness and how you're working to improve it. So in that situation, I just said, that's my problem, and this is how I'm working to improve that problem. If you don't have a weakness, I applaud you, but you probably have a weakness. So it's normal to have a weakness, but take that and turn it into a positive of what you're doing to make it better. So tips for interviewing online. Many interviews are continuing that online format, and we're more familiar with that now because of COVID, and I think you're going to see it continue. If you haven't interviewed online or you want a better experience, here are some tips. So that's going to be flawless. Number one, you all, do a test run the day before the interview. A lot of times an organization is going to send you that link the day before your interview. Get on your computer the day before, make sure the link works, make sure your sound works, make sure your camera works, you can access everything. Make sure your software is updated. I got on Zoom today and my software had to update. So, but I gave myself 5 or 10 minutes before, so make sure to check all of that out before you get online. That's going to help you feel comfortable, and that's going to make sure that you're not late for anything. Also, too, you may want to test it with a friend. So if you don't have Zoom or Teams, you may want to have a friend be on the other end and make sure those features work. Pick a clean, well-lit spot. Make sure you're in a well-lit, clean room. You want the interviewer to be able to focus on you and not the background, not the distractions in the room. So natural light is the best for a background. Avoid interviewing in a car or hiding in a closet. So let me tell you all this. Once again, I've done a lot of interviews. When somebody sits in a car and has their seatbelt on, it is the most distracting thing ever. I had a coworker who did an interview a couple of months ago, and the person sat in their office of the job they are currently employed at and shut the door, but you could see the window behind them and you could see people moving back and forth. You could see people talking back and forth. And, you know, my coworker said it was so distracting. I couldn't really even focus on what was being said. So you definitely want to interview somewhere that is a good space, not your car, not a closet, not the bathroom. You know, the library is free and open to the public. They have study rooms you can go interview in if that helps. So you may want to look at picking a time where you're alone, or you can come into work later. So a room in your house, just somewhere where it's clean, well lit, and quiet. It can be a real turnoff to interview at work. And you may think people don't know you're at work. They know you're at work. Another thing too is to eliminate distractions. So if you're interviewing at home, 30 minutes before you start, take your time to get ready. So I always say, silence your phone, put your dog up, silence your email, tell your family members what's going on, so that they're aware of the situation and they're not walking around your house naked or without clothes on. I mean, we've all seen those memes during COVID, right? When somebody's spouse comes in and they like don't have their clothes, like something ridiculous. So, you know, make sure people know what is going on. I had an interview one time, and this was during the height of COVID, and it was with a high-ranking director of the program, and their child walked in half clothed, you all, and I could see it because the child was behind them. They could not see it. And when they figured out that their child was walking around like that, they shut their camera down so quick, I felt like the interview was over. So really just try to eliminate those distractions because they happen. I think we're better at it now because we've been doing it a few years, but it's always something to think about. Like we talked about earlier, always log on early. You want to show up to an in-person interview 5 to 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Same thing for online. They may not sign on till that time, but you want to make sure that you're early and that your equipment's ready. And then finally, sit up and dress properly online. Dress from top to bottom. And I say this, right, we've all seen the memes too, where the person has their interview shirt on and then their pandemic pajama pants. What if something happens and you have to get up and that is seen? You want to treat it like it's an in-person interview. So please dress from top to bottom in appropriate clothing, because you never know if you're going to have to get up, and you don't want that to happen, let's be honest. So I like to say this is a great online room setup. I wish I had this set up, right? So these are the things we already talked about. This is a clean environment. This looks like a clean home office. There's not a lot of clutter out. We got that natural light from the windows, the greenery. Looks like a really good space, you all, right? So that is what we want. We want a clean, well-lit, natural light area. This is not what we want, everybody. We can see the complete difference in all of this. There is clutter everywhere, books everywhere, stuff on the floor. It's not very well lit. I don't even know if anyone goes in that room, but I always like to say we want that clean, well lit area, and not that whatever that may be. And we may have a room like that. That's not the room to do your online interview in. So a follow-up. So you made it through that interview. And so these are just a few tips with follow-up with the interview. So I always say send a thank you note to the main contact you've been working with. I think it's hard to send notes now because we don't really know people's addresses anymore. You know, I'm a contractor for a company. I don't actually work at their site. But if you're not going to send a thank you note, that thank you email, that follow-up email, thanking them for the opportunity and asking if you need to clarify any of your answers. Follow up if you haven't heard back. I'm a recruiter, and so I tell people, if you haven't heard from me in a week, please email me. It doesn't offend me. It doesn't insult me. You know, something may have happened. I may have dropped the ball. The client, something may have came up with them. Just follow back up with us. And that's okay to follow back up. I don't look at it as a negative thing. Somebody may be on vacation. Someone may have gotten sick. An emergency may have happened. So if you haven't heard back within a week, please follow up. I think it's really crucial to sit back and evaluate your performance. What did you do great and what did you do better? And I always used to do that after all my interviews. Like I told you, during COVID, I went through this frenzy of interviews. I wish I would have kept count now, but every time I would leave, I would write down some notes on my phone. This is where I really feel I excelled, and this is where I really didn't excel. And maybe this is something I can work on for the future. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Remember that nothing is guaranteed. You did get the interview. That's always the first step, but you don't know if you'll get the job. So always keep applying. I have people I phone screen all the time who go through the interview process with a hiring official and they don't get the job. But then maybe the job opens up again and that hiring official says, hey, will you contact candidate X and bring them back in? Have them come back in. I think they'll be a good fit now. So it may not have happened the first time, and that's okay. It may happen again, but don't just apply to one job. If you're really out there looking, apply to multiple jobs, apply to jobs that interest you and jobs you want to be a part of. A big thing too is don't ghost other interviews. So say you do get this job, you've accepted this job, it's the job you want, it's that dream job. Don't ghost other interviews. I tell people all the time, I set up phone screens and I screen candidates. I let them pick the time even. I have at least one candidate a week who has picked the time. I've told them my phone number I'm calling from. They don't answer. They just don't answer. So don't ghost other interviews. You know, recruiters in your interviews, they make notes of that in your profile. So don't do that. But what you should do is send them an email and communicate with them. You don't ever want to burn any bridge because you never know who you're going to need in the future, or maybe you would want to work there in the future. So this is my final slide, I believe, for you all. And so it's called Tips for Success. And this is what I deem to be the most important things when you are back in that interviewing world. Remember that you are interviewing them. So many times we get so nervous and so anxious because we're like, did I do right? Did I do well? Did I do this? Did they do right? Did they do well? Do you want to be a part of them? Are they a right fit for you? I had a job I took a while ago, and after a couple months, it wasn't a right fit for me. It made me anxious when I went to work. I wasn't getting to do the work I was told in the interview I was going to do. And I'm not one to be a job hopper, but I'm also not one to be miserable. And so should I have asked other questions? Should I have done some more research? Should I have looked at some things? Maybe, or maybe that's just how the situation fell. But remember, when they're interviewing you, ask them questions back. Ask them about their company culture. Ask them who works there. Ask them things. You got to make sure it's a two-way street, and you need to make sure that it goes both ways. Don't ever badmouth your previous employer. Listen, if that's the only thing you take away from this, don't do it, you all. Just don't do it. This is something I didn't touch on, and I meant to. I get ahead of myself, but have follow-up questions to ask the interviewer. So I always would have a list of follow-up questions that I asked at the end. They would say, do you have any questions for me? And I think it's always good to have 2 or 3 questions. And some of those questions may be, What is the timeline for hiring? How soon are you looking to hire? Is this role a new role, or are you replacing someone? And if you're replacing someone, why did they leave? A question you may ask too is, how will this person be evaluated on their performance at 3 months, 6 months, a year? I always had a handful of questions that I would ask, and I think that helps to create that conversational flow that we talked about. But that also goes back to remember that you're interviewing them to make sure that you're a right fit. So I would always have some follow-up questions to ask the interviewers. Just to show your interest in the position. And you may have more questions that maybe they haven't addressed or weren't in the job description. So I, as an interviewer, as a recruiter, I never get mad about follow-up questions. It could be something about benefits. It could be something about retirement. It could be something about, it could be anything, but that lets me know that they've taken an interest in this position and they're excited and maybe they want to know a little bit more. An elevator speech about yourself. So when I was on that interview bonanza, I probably could recite my elevator speech to you all, but I will not do it because I feel like it's so ingrained in my mind still. But have that elevator speech about yourself. And, James asked that question, should that elevator speech include personal information? I would say no. I would stay away from that. That can create bias, and that's not something you want to have. So I would leave out that personal information and I would make it strictly professional. Always, you all know where you are applying and the position that you are applying for. You would think that would be common sense, and it's not sometimes. So know where you're applying, know about the company. We talked about doing that research about that company, know where you applied, and know about that position that you've applied for. And then practice those sample questions. So practice those hard to answer questions. You can get on Google too and Google most asked interview questions, most popular interview questions, and then use that SARA method that we talked about to go about answering those questions, and then just reviewing your notes, going over them. But I definitely think practice helps with that, and it helps to relieve some of that anxiety and nervousness you may have. But I think the best advice that I can give you out of all of this is be yourself. You have to be yourself in an interview. If you're not yourself, you're going to put yourself in a situation where you may not fit in, and you may not be the right fit, or they may not be the right fit for you. So always be yourself, be who you are, and be true to yourself. I think sometimes people can tell when you aren't. I can sometimes tell when I talk to people if they're being themselves, they're being true to yourself. So that is some of that's maybe my biggest takeaway, is just be yourself. But are there any questions out there that I can try and answer for you?
Oh, yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One of them, and it may be, you talked about not ever bad mouthing your previous employer. What are some other no-nos that you shouldn't bring to an interview? And the other question that goes along with that is, what's some examples of negative body language?
So, James, say the first question for me again.
What are some of the other big no-nos to do an interview? You mentioned never badmouth your previous employer, but what are some other no-nos that you shouldn't do?
Yeah, so I think not badmouthing your previous employer. I think not bringing your personal drama, your personal life situations. That goes back to keeping it professional. So not bringing maybe your personal baggage, different things like that. I would just keep it strictly professional. I wouldn't badmouth your previous employer. I wouldn't act like I don't know what the position is. Sometimes I interviewed for an alcohol beverage company, and I hired a driver, and then he said, oh, this conflicts with who I am as a person. Know where you're applying, know what you're doing. But I would definitely, I think the employer is the biggest thing. If I had to think of anything, that's the biggest, and bringing that personal drama.
Okay.
And then you said body language.
Yes. What's some examples of negative body language?
Sure. So I think I remember one interview specifically when I was in higher education, and this person tapped their foot the whole time, like violently tapped their foot. And maybe, and I think a lot of that is nerves, but I wouldn't tap. I wouldn't like play with my fingers. If I have my hands, I would keep them clasped like that. when I get nervous, when I was a kid, I used to twirl my hair. And so now I still do that as adults. But if I clasp my hands, I'm not going to do that. I think slouching, rolling your eyes at certain questions, I think those are definitely some behaviors I would try to avoid.
And another question is, how do you bring up salary? Or when should you bring it up? Or
No, that's great. So as a recruiter, all the companies I recruit for, I get to know the person first. And then I always say, depending on the role. So if it's an hourly role or a salary role is a little bit different. But if it's an hourly role, I usually tell people what they're making an hour. But a lot of times as a recruiter, I'll say to somebody, what are your salary expectations for your next job? What are you looking to make? And I think a lot of recruiters and a lot of hiring officials are more comfortable with that dialogue now. And so if somebody says at the end of the interview, do you have any questions? I would say, well, actually, I do. As I'm transferring to new roles, I was wondering if you could share the salary range with me. And I would maybe use the word range instead of the exact salary, because that's all going to depend upon your experience, different things like that. So I may say, can you provide me with a salary range? And that's just how I would state it. I think you are coming to do a job and you are getting paid for that job. So you should know how much you make. And I wouldn't shy away from that question, to be honest with you.
another question came up was references. When should you contact them? Should you tell them about the position you're interviewing, or what's your thoughts about references?
Yeah, so I would say in the roles I have as a recruiter, I have not had to contact any references. So I have in one role, I've contacted them. I think anytime you apply to a job, you should just, if it says, please list 2 or 3 references. So I always used to have those 2 or 3 people who were my go-to and they knew, but I would let them know. I would always let them know, hey, X, I applied for this job. I put you as a reference. Are you okay with that? Because then when X gets that call, they're ready. It's go time. They're ready for that answer and they're going to sing your praises. So I think definitely when you're putting that person's name down, you should let them know. If you put the same 2 or 3 people, that's your crew. I think they're always going to know that. But I know I've called people before and they've been like, oh, blah, 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 put me as a reference. And it was almost like they were put off by it. And so I think if you're putting a reference to, know that they're going to say good things about you, know that they're going to speak to your highest ability so that you're able to get that job and succeed.
Oh, there was a question that just came up. Anissa, could you ask that question?
Oh, I don't know if I know what that question is, but I do have a question.
It was about, I thought you had typed it in, I'm sorry. But it was about how do you navigate salaries, especially if it's a stringent job, such like a state or a city job, I guess, where the salary range isn't that flexible.
Yeah, so I think the thing is with salary ranges with state, city, any type of government, nonprofit, maybe you're not going to have a lot of room for negotiation. Private orgs, I think you're going to have a lot more room for negotiation. You're not going to have that room for negotiation. So I think if you don't have that room for negotiation, you have to start thinking about other factors. Do they have benefits that I want? Do they provide remote work? Do they have a good PTO policy? And so I think a lot of times there are places where they do have that set salary. There's nothing you can do about it. So you need to think about that before you interview and say, can I live within this salary range? Are there other benefits that apply? And so company may say, this is the range, there's no negotiation. I'd start talking to them about other benefits they offer and see, does that fit with the life that you're living? And will your family be able to eat and survive? Because that's crucial at the end of the day.
So Sarah, I do have a question, and
Sure.
that is, how do you handle a question that you have no experience with? For example, tell us about a time where you supervised the staff and you didn't get along.
Sure.
And if you don't have experience supervising, then how do you go about responding to a question like that?
Sure. So if you've applied for a supervision position and you don't have supervising or experience, they ask that question, I would be honest. I'd be like, I haven't supervised before, but if I was in this situation, this is how I would handle it. And I would use that Sarah method again to talk about, this is how I'm going to handle this situation. This is what I'm going to do. I may also too, I tell college kids this when they're applying for jobs and they're like, I don't have experience in this, or I don't know how to answer those questions. Look back to other things that you've done. Have you volunteered somewhere where that situation happened? Have you been a part of a group or an organization where a situation like that has happened? And use those examples as well, because those are also real life examples that you can use.
Has there anything ever come up in an interview that you had where you said, just based on that answer that the question, that person had, that's an automatic, no, we're not gonna hire that person?
Wow. I think that's a good question. I think there has to be a continual thread for me throughout the interview, but a lot of interviews too are with multiple people, right? So you don't have that bias in an interview. And so I think sometimes, I mean, I would say maybe there has been times when that has happened. I can't think of a specific time, but I think I do know that there was a time when I interviewed at a previous job and they didn't know anything about our organization. They knew nothing. And that was a taste people could not get out of their mouth. Like, no matter what they answered, people were just like, did you know blah, blah, blah? At the beginning, they didn't know about us. And then we would talk about something else and they'd say, but he didn't know anything about us. And so, I think maybe that may have been why that person didn't get that job. But a lot of times when you're in a group consensus like that, I think everybody has to feel the same way about it.
So it's a good idea to research the company that you're interviewing with before you go into the interview.
Man, research, like research it, research every little thing you can. Absolutely.
Oh, great. Well, I don't have any other questions. Are anybody else that's in the panel? Do you all have any questions that you would like to present to Sarah? Well, Sarah, this has been a great, it's not an interview, but this has been a great program. And I enjoyed the conversation and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Awesome. I had a great time with you all, and I hope somebody took away something today. And thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity today.
All right, good. And with that, we're going to end this edition of the Workforce Wednesday. And again, visit the Urban League at our social media pages. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.